Thank you very much. It's working wonderfully. Well, the question I'm going to try and answer is what can we do, what can anyone do to counter religious violence or violence inspired by religion? And I think the important thing we have to acknowledge right from the start is that religion actually quite often isn't the force for good reconciliation and peace that we all hope all religions should be. It is actually very often the inciter of violence and one of the causes which is hijacked by people intent on extremist actions, extremist ideology, who mask themselves or mask their cause under religion. Now, we've seen this in a number of places. If you just think of recent conflicts, quite a number of them have religion, or at least a religious motivation, as the cause. One thinks of, obviously, Northern Ireland. Many people say, well, it has never been religion. It's actually two different groups, two tribal entities, as it were, having a go at each other, and they have done for many years, hundreds of years. Yes, indeed, but they each hijacked their religious badge as the justification for the struggle in Northern Ireland. You think of other places. Nigeria, we're seeing it going on right now. We're seeing the clashes in central Nigeria between the north and the south, and it's particularly acute at the confrontation line between Islam in the north and the Christian part of Nigeria in the south, where both sides are sending in their most ideologically motivated and their toughest fighters to defend their particular cause. Now, in Nigeria, as in a number of places where you have the front line, as it were, between Christianity and Islam, what is actually being fought over is not whether to build a mosque or a church, whether to worship this way or that way. It's grazing rights, it's tribal enmity, it's competition for resources, food, land, whatever it is, that has been at the front of these kind of conflicts for a very long time. But it's particularly convenient to be able to use religion as a cover for that. And we see this around the world. We've seen a number of conflicts where religion is fueling it, and of course, I don't need to dwell on it because everyone has read the depressing details for more than a year now of what's happening in Iraq and Syria, the extremist attempt to set up a so-called caliphate. Now, I think that the thing that we need to think is, what can we do about this? What is the response of either religious people or people using religion to try to counter this sort of violence and this incitement? I think the first thing to acknowledge is there is no easy way. Once an ideology which is seen to be God-given grips people, it is very, very difficult to say to them, you are on the wrong course, you've gone down the wrong way, because of course straight away the martyrdom complex will come in. You are all against me, I must be right. I am doing the right thing in the cause in which I believe. And the more you try to dissuade people, usually, the more difficult it is to change that mindset. There is no single cause. What you can do is try to prevent that kind of susceptibility to religiously motivated extremism. And there are all sorts of attempts to do this. Governments are racking their brains at the moment how to prevent radicalization. Now, I think there are two things to think of here. First of all, government attempts at de-radicalization, straight away you've got two words that are pretty toxic to this effort: government and de-radicalization. Governments do not successfully work in this area. It is places like Coventry or St. Ethelburga's Centre for Reconciliation and Peace, which is this little church in London where I'm one of the trustees, which was the church blown up by the IRA, that has since become a sort of centre for attempting to reach out and build bridges in all sorts of different areas. Governments do not do this well. And similarly, de-radicalization. Well, it's not only an ugly word, but it's a word suggesting a process that is already too late. Once people are radicalized, unless they suddenly, through their own experience, see they've gone a wrong way, and we are seeing some people coming back from Syria or coming back from Iraq who realize that they've seen terrible things and that this is the wrong way. Now, very often people don't come back because either they're killed or they are They're just sort of silenced so that they don't come back and spread the other message. De-radicalization is very difficult. What is much better is what I would call perhaps immunization, so that people are not susceptible to extremist thoughts and ideas or using violence as a means to achieve their ends. Now, immunization can be much, much better, much more effective if you look at some of the things that make people open to this kind of seductive message coming across very effectively on the internet and through social media. One of the things, of course, is it is falling on the ears of people who already have low self-esteem, particularly prisoners, people in prison who feel that they've sort of failed in some way, their lives have failed, they're in prison, they have achieved nothing. When somebody says, you can turn yourself around, you can fight for another God, you could fight for Allah. It's nearly always Islamist extremists who are the most adept at this kind of conversion process. And you will then be somebody, and that is a seductive message. So you have to make sure that the people who are likely to go to prison are not feeling that low self-esteem that makes them susceptible. Well, of course, that means looking at all sorts of other things. It means looking at social conditions. It means looking at job opportunities. It means looking at broken families. It means a whole range of social criteria that leave people vulnerable, open, low self-esteem, all that. There's no easy answer to that. There is perhaps a religious outreach answer, best done, as I say, not by governments, because the moment governments try to reach out to people, and here we're talking almost entirely about the effort to combat Islamist extremism. It's not purely an offshoot of Islam, but I would talk about why we're seeing such a phenomenon there. There are, of course, equally Christian fundamentalists who can be just as narrow in their view and just as dangerous. We've seen some of that in East Africa, particularly. I'll talk about a moment later about that. But the moment governments try to do it, what happens is that anybody they suggest is part of a discussion group to counter extremism is seen as paid up by the government. No street cred at all. Kids will look at these figures, they say, yeah, what are they getting out of it? You know, what's their cut? What's their payoff? It's not going to work that way. It is much better coming from your own peer group, from your own people. Now, religious leaders actually are in a very good position to do something that governments are not, because particularly in countries where religion still has a very strong hold, religious leaders are respected. And I would say this in many countries. Within the Muslim world, Christian leaders, as leaders, carry a lot more weight than Western politicians. And I would say that's true in India, in the Far East, wherever it is, and particularly in this country. I mean, there's an interesting phenomenon in this country. This is not a religious country at all. Church attendance, very, very low. Number of people who actually really have read or understand the Bible or whatever, small. But I cannot remember a time for many, many years when religion has been such a tough political issue in this country. And just look in the newspapers. How often do you see the Archbishop of Canterbury quoted? Quite a lot. How often do you see senior religious figures there on television discussing things? When a religious dignitary says something, it quite often makes news, and particularly if they say something a bit silly, which occasionally they do, it makes a lot of news. And a lot of this is because in this country, we are now deeply questioning our own religious heritage. This is partly the result of this tiny minority of extreme radicals in the Muslim communities who are destabilizing the Muslim world generally, destabilizing their own communities, but they are questioning what we call British values. And so the majority then start to say, well, what are these British values? In fact, there is no such thing as British values. They are normal values of today's functioning democracy. But these values, if you trace them back, do originally come from this country's Christian heritage. They are no longer linked to Christian heritage. Indeed, most people would be deeply offended if they felt that their ideas of ethics, morality, and whatever were dependent on what's read in the Bible. No, but if you look at the origin, it has come from that. And therefore, if you start to question British values, you will find straight away that there is a questioning about the heritage that we have of our religious background. And therefore, religion is a very hot political issue. Now, in a way, this is quite good because it then gives some leverage to those intelligent Christian and other leaders who know how to use that importance and that visibility to do something. Now, I'll give you one or two examples of where I think intelligent religious leadership can really make a difference. The first is a college that has opened about 7 years ago in Cambridge, and it's called the Muslim College of Cambridge. And it is founded by Tim Winter, who is a convert to Islam, Abdul Hakim, he calls himself now, and he is a lecturer in Arabic or in Islamic studies at the University of Cambridge, and he thought it would be important for those young imams who graduate from the many, well, not many, but the various schools of to train as imams in this country, if they had a better sense of the country in which they are going to live and work. Because the problem is that in some of these colleges, they go quite early on, and they stay 4 or 5 years, and they come out with a very thorough knowledge of the Quran and of the Hadith and of the life of the Prophet and Islam generally. They don't have a very good idea of British society. So this college takes these graduates, about 15 a year, and they do an absolutely rigorous course in life in Britain. They start with British literature, English literature, almost from Anglo-Saxon days till now. They have to do British political systems. They have to visit Westminster. They have to understand the judiciary. They have to do a course with the police. They have to do interfaith relations. They have a 5-day residency at the Vatican where they have to interact with Catholics. They then come away fully understanding they are going to be imams working in the centre of Bradford, working in Sheffield, Coventry, wherever it might be, living in this country. Now that, if anything, gives people a sense of belonging to the community where they are. That seems to me an extremely good thing, and it is done by Muslims for Muslims. Another one, which I thought was most effective, is something that the British Council has done. And I went with the head of the British Council in March to Cairo. And in Cairo, you have Al-Azhar University, which is the main center of Sunni Islamic learning, 1,000 years old. And it's really the only central source of learning in the Sunni Islamic world. What they say and what they do matters because their influence is spread out across the Islamic world. And they have decided they really need to teach their young trainees, their graduates, their imams, English. So the British Council is now offering intensive English courses to all the young imams at Al-Azhar in order to give them the opportunity and the possibility to blog back again at the extremists, to answer in English. It has to be in English. It's no good just answering in Arabic. All your extremists coming from Pakistan, the Far East, wherever, or in this country, probably wouldn't understand if it's just an answer in Arabic. In English, they have then the possibility to answer back. Now, the problem is, will they do it? If they have sufficiently good English, you would hope that they will answer. And I do think that religious authorities have an obligation to speak to their flock and to say, this is wrong. What you are doing is wrong. It's no good saying, we are bringing, or some extremists are bringing our religion into disrepute. You actually have to say, this is wrong. Now, I don't want to dwell just on Muslim or Islamist, and we use this word in the press, Islamist meaning political Islam, not Islamic meaning the culture of Islam. Islamist, this new phenomenon of political Islam, is the phenomenon that is destabilizing much of the Middle East at the moment, and I'm afraid is a symptom of what I think is a wider difficulty, and that is, first of all, the deepening split between Shia and Sunni, and secondly, the real difficulty that mainstream Islam has in confronting modernity. Just as Christianity had a tremendous problem confronting modernity in 1440 or so, the time of Martin Luther, and you got that 200-year struggle for what is Christianity all about, what is the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation. By coincidence, the Muslim calendar is almost exactly at that same date. And we are seeing a broader discussion that's going on beneath the surface, and this is all part of it. But I said I don't just want to dwell on that. There's exactly the same thing where you get a narrow interpretation of Christianity. And I would just take a small example. Well, it's not small to the people involved. In East Africa, which is Uganda, where you have this extraordinarily vitriolic campaign against gay people in Uganda, which is actually being manipulated by fundamentalist pastors from America, because they are in a cultural battle in America, which they've lost. But Uganda is fairly open to a lot of the preaching there, and you are using a populist cause, which is quite widely felt. People are reasonably, hostile to gays and all that, but it's using it as a means to try to make a certain group strong and important and self-important. That is as wrong and as wrong-headed as any other thing. As I say, there is no single easy cause. I would just summarize to say religious figures have more influence than political figures and are using it. Archbishop Justin Welby, who I know quite well because he was also on the board of St. Ethelburgers, has been traveling around the world doing quite a lot in this respect, as well as visiting primates there. I must just tell you one funny story about when he was traveling around from this center at Coventry. When he was working here, he went out to the West Bank to give an attempt to release a kidnapped victim, and he got himself seized and a gun pointed at him. And as that happened, his mobile phone rang. The guys who had seized him said, "You are a spy. What are you doing here?" The phone rang. He said, "May I answer?" He answered it. And they said, "Is that Mr. Welby?" He said, "Yes." "This is Clearview Double Glazing here. We've got an appointment to come to you on Wednesday." And so he said, "Actually, at the moment, I've just been kidnapped, and I'm on the West Bank, and I've got an AK-47 pointed at me." "Oh, would Friday be better?" He got out, and so did the hostages, luckily. But anyway, that sort of leadership is important. Others who are doing that similar sort of leadership all across the world, they matter. They must be encouraged. What can we all do against religious violence? Recognize it, understand it, religiously inspired violence, and understand that religion has as big a duty to prevent violence as, unfortunately, it has a hand in causing it. Thank you.
Can you say this, Michael?
Yes.